In Africa, I went to the market in search of good seedlings for tomatoes. She looked everywhere, but she was constantly dissatisfied with the price. Here, an older woman caught her attention. You, that one also had pots of tomato sprouts. Coming up closer, it's raining and I almost faint. This turned out to be her mother-in-law, Mrs. Morgan. What are you doing here? She rose from her chair and quietly answered, How see, I sell seedlings, sold almost everything. What are you? Didn't recognize me well, thank you, live even longer. By the way, how are you? Africa shrugged, yes, all the same. Is it true, children grew up, daughters graduated from college, and my son just went to college. Mother-in-law collected the remnants of seedlings and called for her, let's go to stop. Once you come here means have time. Not worrying about the tomatoes, I still have sprouts at home. I don't plant much, so I only eat them in the summer. Grandchildren, how did you put it right, become adults, and never them to come to their grandmother? Mrs. Morgan did not reproach, she just expressed her opinion. However, Africa answered like this, they are learning, with almost no free time. I agree, for the children to come, mother-in-law smiled slyly. This you are right, and studying does not allow you to relax. But I also know that grandchildren visit your mother. It turns out that there is time for her, and they are happy to go there. You, Mrs. Morgan, was a complex character, and Africa did not argue with her. When the husband was still alive, often had to listen and reproaches. At the same time, my mother-in-law taught me a lot, and if it weren't for her now there would be, did not go to the country, this is a very big help, when vegetables in the store go up in price. Also, mother-in-law taught her frugality, and the daughter-in-law constantly saves money for a rainy day. It's a pity that she did not save her son, he suddenly fell ill, and died a few months later. But then Mrs. Morgan never stopped caring for her family. Exactly about it, maybe, she wanted to say. Slowly they came to a stop. In Africa I bought 2 tickets. By half an hour the mother-in-law had already set the table. Don't blame me, but I'm a friendly person, do not hesitate, and help yourself. When we can still meet like this, Africa felt ashamed that she completely forgot about Mrs. Morgan. Sorry that we rarely visit you, but my mom has been sick a lot lately and I have to look after her. Elderly woman took a sip and said, well, yes, when the bridegroom arranged her personal life, didn't think about it, that soon all men and nobody except children will not help. Mother-in-law hit the spot again, because she really helped Africa, while her own mother traveled the cities in search of happiness. Later years it took support, and she remembered Africa's daughter, broke off a piece of the pie and asked, what do you do at the weekend? I still did not sort out the things of the deceased husband. A year has passed since his death, but didn't decide. I have in the closet. Maybe, come and tell, what to leave, what to get rid of. Mrs. Morgan thought, and then answered, certainly, I will look to you. She is my words. No offense, I didn't say anything bad about the article. She is now calm and waiting for you, like manna from heaven. Between others, Smoke didn't leave anyone, his soul was in pain, and you know it very well. After all came to me, as long as you needed me, and then, when another grandmother appeared, then they forgot the way. After a couple of hours Africa returned home. My mother-in-law, as I promised, gave her the best tomato seedlings, only she didn't make her happy. All because what Mrs. Morgan told the truth again. Maybe, somewhere and exaggerated, but overall it was right, and its raining really didn't do well with her. She immediately called the children and told them to be at home on weekends. My mother-in-law came a few days to help with things. How once at this time there were also grandchildren. Grandmother, we haven't seen you for so long. Africa couldn't resist and added, naturally, and if it continues then you will completely stop and recognize. As this day you should call at least sometimes, Mrs. Morgan. Understand, what are you used to my mom, but my grandmother on my father's side did no less good. What? Did it affect her reproaches or a sense of shame, that all together, yes, and with an admixture of compassion? Africa didn't forget, how did her mother-in-law help her? were moments when my husband's salary was delayed, and precisely Mrs. Morgan helped out. They are her own mother. She was far away and answered all the requests of her daughter. I raised you alone. Here is what I can do to get out. It's raining and I did not expect that the time would come when Mom asked for help. Notice seedlings in pots. Mother-in-law asked, why hasn't she been dropped yet? To me like my sprouts, so it should have been said. I wouldn't take them out. Everyone misunderstood. I love your seedlings, I would like to drop her off together. For she invited you and asked the children to come. Tomorrow let's go to the country and do everything. Now let's try to clean up the closet. Children participated without much enthusiasm, and here Mrs. Morgan put each item separately. What talked to us, and this is the memory of the son. I look at this box and think, how did he work on it? Didn't spare the time, sometimes making it at night. Africa added, this water that's when we made a house for our daughter with him, didn't rest at all. Was time, and all the crafts are preserved. Here I think, can you put them in a circle? Mrs. Morgan liked her idea. I agree, let the other kids do it too. Now, certainly, and plenty of other fun, but these toys will not be superfluous. Her daughter approached Africa. Look, I found some letters. For sure correspondence. What do you think? Worth reading it. It's raining. Looking at the stack of envelopes. Most of them had no return address at all, and someone else's handwriting. Here on those, where the hand was traced Bob and all data is clearly displayed and glued with stamps, the late husband corresponded. Africa put the letters in the box. After I will read if there is time. Now I don't have time to deal with them. Mother-in-law noticed her excitement and, when the grandchildren went to the kitchen, quietly asked, Not you want to know the truth? Yes, don't be shy. I immediately understood. What are you worried about? By the way, I don't know anything about these letters, so I'm as surprised as you. Although, if you don't want to stir up the past, you can get rid of them. It's raining. Nodded in agreement. I don't want to read them either. Husband dead, and why look for the truth in some letters? Because she trusted him, which means that I have no right to doubt him now. Let's do so. When we go to the dacha to plant tomatoes, I will burn the letters in the oven. All they were just words, because it's raining could not resist and left myself a few envelopes. Chose those, which are dated to the last days shortly before his death. On the next day everyone went to plant tomatoes, and get some fresh air. By Mrs. Morgan shows grandson how to make a hole, and what to put in it. Africa lit a small fire. She pre-prepared letters, sat down on a bench and began to throw them one by one into the fire, and watched from the corner of my eye. What does mother-in-law and her children do? When they turned away, it's raining put the letters under the lid of the bath and threw crumpled sheets of paper into the fire. So she decided that he must read them, so that between her and her late husband there were no omissions. Mrs. Morgan was so fascinated by landings that didn't notice anything, and when she came, the fire in the fire is almost extinguished. Mother-in-law put its raining hand on shoulder, and cleansed my soul. Now no need to think, what's smoke guilty of something. He would never allow myself to cheat, if it came to your mind. I certainly did not hold a candle, but in his son confidently. Mrs. Morgan tried to lull her vigilance. It's raining understood it back then, when the mother-in-law asked about the past. For sure she knows something, but does not want to make it public. The kids had a great time. Can say that recharged with positive energy for the week ahead. In the evening Africa came home for letters. She was going to come back later, even if you wanted to know everything. However, it is forbidden to Mrs. Morgan suspected something. If she will understand that the correspondence has not been destroyed, the same will go to look for her and will definitely find. Except only children could come to her dacha, but if they were there, then they gathered with friends and grilled kebabs. Bath definitely never melted means you don't have to worry about the safety of letters. One day an old friend came to visit her from a trip abroad. It's raining was incredibly happy about it. Here's so meeting. I thought, what all, you won't come to the USA anymore. Rose smiled and said, "Yes, what are you, here my family, and their only rest and pleasant acquaintances." How Smoke I was beaten off, so I no longer began to look for a life partner. No, men I have, even in abundance, but I don't want to get married. It was all Rose, who cultivated the image of unmarried and free women. Her Africa and decided to ask, tell, and after that, how Smoke began to live with me. He didn't write you love letters, who knows, suddenly nostalgia and the desire to test your feelings. I beg you, how he began to live with you, other women ceased to exist for him at all, said a friend. He idolized you, so calm down. Mistress Bob did not have patron Saint de Larissa. She was not convinced, but she did not express this topic more. But I understood that these letters are not from a friend. Quicker total, there was another woman in the life of the late husband, maybe a few more weeks. It's raining. All could not decide to read the letters. She managed to go to the cottage and bring them home. Total turned out to be 10 pieces, and they were written in the last year of her husband's life. It's raining somehow slowed down. She was afraid, maybe, did not want to spoil the memory of the deceased wife. Finally, Africa gathered her thoughts and began to open letters. One, unfolded trembling in the hands. To her, never had to read someone else's correspondence, but circumstances force, because I want to know the truth. From the first message she learns that the mysterious stranger's name is Clara, and she confesses to Bob what awaits and loves him very much. So thank you for meeting his mother. And now that was interesting. Turns out, the late husband brought Clara here. Only why didn't she know about it? It's raining looked at the date, and the answer came by itself. In that period, the authorities sent her on a business trip for a week. Bob took advantage of her absence. Brought me a mistress. Woman, how to say to yourself, now it's clear, why did the mother-in-law not want for me to read letters? She knew everything. She was silent. Me like they're holding you for a fool. Inside, rage raged at Mrs. Morgan. A still pretended to be an innocent sheep. So talked bitterly about that my children and don't visit, and do it right, even though my mom is not an angel. She dated other men. However, did it not with a living husband. Inflamed brain and anger demanded revenge, but Africa decided to postpone her trip to her mother-in-law until all the details were clarified. There was also a mention of a child in this letter. Unclear, they are her children or Smoke managed to leave his mark. And in any case, it is necessary to find out and give a logical explanation to everything. Literally 2 days later, Mrs. Morgan visits her again. Africa thought to myself, on the catcher and the beast run. Was wanting to say it all, but she decided to check her guesses. Mother-in-law, suspecting nothing, went into the kitchen and put the kettle on. It's raining of living rooms, shouted, You can't make coffee for them there, and then my throat is dry from and that you yourself can't come up. Actually, it's me visiting you, answered Mrs. Morgan. Here Africa decided to start. Nothing terrible, someone you've welcomed. I do not speak, that you didn't have to pour tea or set the table. These words drove the mother-in-law into a dead end. If my memory fails me, then you recently had, and I fed you. No one came. Clear case, that the old woman did not understand, what is it about, or pretended, like he's having a hard time. It's raining added, remember, September 3rd, 2 years ago you didn't have to host anyone at home. Mother-in-law frowned. It's been so long that I don't remember anymore. Maybe someone was visiting, but why do you need such details, then, to understand? Whose side are you on? Said Africa. Like crying in a vest that my children do not visit you. Right away I know what exactly in that period Smoke came to you. And none. Only do not tell me that the memory has gone, and you don't know anything about it. This number won't work. How, what's this? Tried to brainwash me. Mrs. Morgan did a veto, as if the words of the daughter-in-law are a mystery to her. She sat on the couch and tried to figure everything out. You say so, like it's my fault, but before maybe, my son arrived on September 3rd, but what does it change and what do I have to do with it? It's raining, and handed her an envelope with a letter. Mother-in-law unfolded the sheet and began to read to herself. after putting it aside and saying, "This does not mean anything." And here. I don't really remember that day, when Smoke came with another woman. You know, that he had spare keys to my apartment, and the son could get there at any moment. By the way, you wanted to get rid of the letters. We have agreed with you that we will not stir up the past. But you are not interested. With whom did he correspond? And I'm his wife, and I must understand, how far did his side flings go? All of a sudden these are not the only letters, and now a whole stack of the same envelopes is stored somewhere. Nevertheless, I strongly recommend that you burn all letters. Not even an hour. What else can you think of? Because we don't know what's in the rest of the messages. Don't you think, Wat Smoke didn't throw them out on purpose? Herself dish. Why would he leave dirt on himself in the house? It's an unforgivable mistake. Mother-in-law suggested it's raining. Somehow didn't think about it. You're right, in this that is. How I didn't think of it before, but I still can't understand one. Why is this? And Clara wrote about it. What was not? Mrs. Morgan read the letter and said, "To me seems that the son thus wants to give a hint, and for that matter, then you need to study the rest of the correspondence. I will not bother you, and don't rush. Maine, read carefully and try these answers. When my mother-in-law was walking, it's raining." I leaned over the letter and thought, do you believe me, mother-in-law? All of a sudden she again diverts in the north direction. Second, she opened the letter only 2 days later. All this time I was thinking, what could the words mean? Clara regarding the child. Really, Smoke was with her, and she gave birth to his internal instinct prompted what to look for this woman. But what will she tell her, if they happen to meet? Not holding on, whether it started reading. And letters were only sensual declarations of love and good luck wishes. Nowhere information about the whereabouts of Clara did not slip. Such an impression. What Smoke? I invented everything and wrote to myself for more than a week. Woman put together all the thoughts from the correspondence. Was difficult, because in each message there are completely different intonations of presentation and more new facts. Only one thing hasn't changed, is the mention of the child in the last letter. So Clara thanked him for financial support. But how could he help her, if all the money Africa was in charge? And that day she went to the country, to get some air, but I had to face it, that the mother-in-law was engaged in beds. Seeing, she asked, "Well, how are the letters?" I also strained my brains a little and remembered that the son arrived on September 3rd, but I was not at home. I learned about it from a neighbor, who just saw Smoke with another woman. I still thought, what can a relative bring? But my grandmother assured me that he gave her flowers and kissed her. Africa was shocked by what you heard. Why do I only find out now about them during the life of her husband? Mrs. Morgan, I wanted to comfort her. That's why now my son is better, he doesn't have to talk to you. Although, what am I saying? The question remains, and someone has to answer them. Daughter-in-law waiting for an explanation. You mother-in-law had no motive to hide something, anyway, no benefit from it. She told Africa, what on that day Smoke brought a woman. Naturally, he got into the apartment with a spare key. Mrs. Morgan, when I found out about it, the first thing I asked, what it's raining, say how you explain everything to her, but the son did not want to report, and asked his mother not to meddle in her own business. Why have you been silent for so long? Said Africa. Hid from me his intrigues, but there's nothing you can do, don't ask him now. He hid in the world, as if he knew, that food me before a wave of betrayals rolls. Cold, it's too late to complain. Better tell, did he leave any documents with you? Yes, like no, I have nowhere to hide. If you will have time, then come tomorrow, and now you can go home, I'm in charge here. Thanks to your children, for taking the time to visit me. In this turmoil Africa completely forgot about my mom, straight surrender. She went to her. Mrs. Perry was at home. Daughter, what are you out of breath? Fled whether it's raining, shook her head. Yes, no, it's just that it's been so busy, that it became difficult to breathe. You won't believe, but I just found out, that in life Smoke cheated on me. I knew it, that someday it will happen, said Mom. Not my, certainly, case, but the deceased take. One day came with another woman. Yes, this I know, interrupted her daughter. Although wait, Where do you get this information? So he told me about it. Woman, I did not see, but I can assure you, what if Smoke confessed to something, then it's true. By the way, mother-in-law Kay, yours is also aware, if you didn't talk to her. I then asked, what documents did he leave me to take? Told that he hid important notes from his mother. Africa just couldn't believe it. Mrs. Morgan told me that she has no secrets. Yes, your mother-in-law is a master of disinformation. She will tell you what you want, and you will believe it. I advise you to visit her again, said Mom. Africa already wanted to leave, but then Mother realized, wait, so did you read his letters? Not understood. Where you know about them, surprised daughter. Smoke showed them to me. I just didn't take it seriously. Thought he was joking. When I found out the truth, I was afraid to tell you about it. Too, by that time your husband had already fallen ill. In general, no need to say more, you know the result. Now It's Raining knew even more than when you first read the letter. It turns out that her mother-in-law and her mother kept her in the dark all this time. Well, for what purpose? Africa almost left the apartment. Suddenly Mrs. Perry said, there he had a child, and your mother-in-law keeps copies of. Which then documents? Address, by the way, available. If find, then you will know the whole truth. After this It's Raining did not postpone the trip to the mother-in-law, and the next day it was already with her. How and last time, and said that knows nothing. Then It's Raining and she herself began to inspect the apartment, and after half an hour she found the very cash. Mrs. Morgan there was nowhere to go, and she removed the rope from her neck, on which hung a small key from this note to Africa, opened it, and pulled out the papers. Among copies of medical reports were, and the address was written and on a piece of paper. If you had told me everything before, then you wouldn't have to read these letters. Answer lay on the surface. You, my mom, turns out, everyone knew, but were silent. I'll go to this address and find out everything. By day in Africa's had a train ticket, she knew exactly what is waiting for her. Except she read the addresses and the medical reports, so I basically understand that some girl has health problems. It's Raining was in a hurry, because she needed to see those people, for which Smoke tried and even went to treason. I the path ran sperm. Exactly, husband went there, and his daughter lives there now. She didn't say anything to the kids, so that they do not ask for a trip. In Road Africa feared only one. Suddenly the same Clara was an aggressive person, because in the letters she did not reveal her character, maybe, can make a scandal. But everything turned out wrong. Clara was no longer alive, she also died due to illness. It seems that they were attracted by a common misfortune, which resulted in the birth of a girl. But now she's not happy, because she has been disabled since childhood and can only move slowly. After the death of her mother, she had practically no relatives left. They all live far away. Only Grandma helps, but she is old and no longer able to visit often. My name was Maria, just such a name, Smoke, I wanted to give my daughter. Africa talked to her for a long time. Everyone tried to understand how the husband was going to treat the child. Maria told that he made copies of the medical reports and promised to find specialists, but didn't have time, because he ended up in the hospital and died. It's Raining, there was no doubt about how to deal with the girl. She invited her to move to them in the city, and she agreed. She just didn't have a choice. Also immediately upon arrival It's Raining introduced her to the children. Now they are one family, son, daughter, and take care of Maria. She still hasn't forgiven her mother and mother-in-law for their ruthless silence. After all, they did so, as if this problem will never affect them.